welcome to the Jumpstart podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 12th episode, we will talk to Lea Pica, who is dedicated to making the world give better presentations. Lea and I have only met recently, which she will explain a little bit about in the podcast, but I feel like we've already hit it off and established a rapport as we grow and refine our online businesses. You'll hear a lot about this as well. I recorded this episode, an intro from Aruba, squeaking things out before the holidays, and while I still had a good internet connection. This is the last episode of season 1 of the podcast. I'm doing this for a few reasons. First, it's the holiday season where I doubt a lot of people will be listening to the podcast. And second, because it's hard to find people willing to record during the holidays as well. So I need to go back and restock the cupboard, if you will, which I'll be working on intensely in January and February. We're releasing this episode a day earlier than normal on December 23rd. Why not just wait until some other time? Because I wanted to wrap up season 1 in 2015, and I wanted to give a retrospective on season 1 next week as an episode as well. So that's the only way to do it with the timing. In retrospect, I should have picked another date other than Thursday to launch my podcast. I launched it on October 1st, and I've been doing it every Thursday. But I took Thanksgiving Day off in the United States. And then also there's 2 other major holidays in the U.S. happening at the same time. There's Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. And so I'm not sure that anybody's going to listen to it. But when I started this thing, October 1st was the date that I set for myself. I said I need to launch it on October 1st. Otherwise, I'm never going to do this stupid podcast. Sorry, I don't mean to call it a stupid podcast, but you know what I mean. So lesson learned, don't launch things on a Thursday when every major holiday falls into a Thursday in the 4th quarter. Anyways, I digress. So let's talk to Lea Pica. Lea has a great mind for analytics, a great eye for design, and an awesome podcasting voice as well. I've really grown to love Lea's podcast, Present Beyond Measure, and I think it's something that you should be listening to as well. So let's listen along as Lea shares her journey into the world of search, analytics, and building better presentations. For show notes, visit jeffalytics.com/Lea. Okay, we're here today with Lea Pica. Lea, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I just want to say I'm so honored to join some of the guests that you've had, and congratulations on this new venture. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for coming along. We've talked a little bit ourselves on your podcast as well, so it's great to do sort of a home and home series where I get to interview you and you get to interview me. So this is sort of the completion of that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how both of these turn out.
Me too.
Let's learn about you. And so the first thing I wanted to know is what made you get excited about this career? You're obviously involved in the analytics and marketing career. What was the first moment that hooked you in this career?
So in college, I loved psychology and computers, and there were exactly 0 majors designed to take advantage of that intersection. So I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I actually found a job with a rich media company out of college, and they basically created online e-commerce enhancements like color change and product enhancements and things like that. I was actually their event coordinator, which was the worst possible job for me. I sucked at it, never doing it again. I totally respect people that are great at it. But just on a lark, one of my bosses asked me to take a closer look at their website because they were redesigning it, and look at things like their database marketing, how their leads were funneling in through Salesforce from the website, look at things like press releases. And one day she asked me to do SEO, this mystical thing called SEO on the site. This was a while ago. And I tell you, it was like being struck by lightning, where there was so much psychology involved with the way content is positioned on a page and the different values it has, and doing keyword research. It was all about what people wanted. And I've always been deeply invested in understanding what it is people want and how they look for things. And that was absolutely the gateway to learning about email marketing and usability, all other kinds of internet marketing. Analytics came along a little bit later when I was managing a search program for Scholastic, and there wasn't really a robust reporting system in place to understand how our search program was doing. And I remember, our first tool was IBM Surfaid, and I was one of the only people really looking at it and trying to use it to answer questions. And it just was incredible to see the progression of and behavior of people on the website. It was in a bit of a rudimentary fashion, but it was just amazing to see what the efforts we were doing in campaign marketing, what they were translating to in actual behavior. It was just absolutely fascinated to me, and I've just never looked back.
Yeah, it's great. So somebody tasked you with an opportunity that you didn't really even see coming, and it helped you go from doing something that wasn't really at all interesting to you and wasn't necessarily a career option for you into sort of setting the tone for what's become a great career in this area of marketing and analytics.
Absolutely. And it's just so funny because what was a revelation to me when I was learning this was that I had been a consumer and on the end user side of all of that marketing psychology by other sites since I had a computer in high school. And to see what was behind the scenes there was really what was so fascinating to me.
Yeah. Okay. So psychology is the first one for me as far as interviewing somebody and talking about the merger between psychology and technology. But it's sort of fascinating to see that that's two different areas of focus for you. So what was your major in college, or what did you go to? Was it studying psychology, or what was the path there from an education standpoint?
Not at all. The closest thing I could find that would take advantage of my practical affinity towards computers was information systems. And that was a very difficult major for me. I'm the type of person where if I'm very, very passionate about something, I throw myself in whole hog. But when something doesn't agree with me, I tend to rail against it and smash my hands and have a tantrum. So I tantrumed through most of that major, being that some of it was, fundamental radio signal frequencies was an entire class.
Mm-hmm.
The database aspect definitely resonated with me, but I made sure to take some marketing classes outside of that. And that also really resonated with me, but the technology piece was always at the core. My senior project was working with SAP. So I loved the idea of databases and how data connects and relates to each other. So that I think was my first clue that somehow the relation of data would become relevant to my career at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so were you able to put that into practice right out of school then, or is that a more of a struggle? It sounds like to get to that point where you could actually use those skills that you had gained.
Well, I would say most of my major has gone unused, and that's okay. I know many, many analysts who were history majors, and that is in
Mm-hmm.
no way applicable to digital marketing. But it was more, you know, I've always been very interested in crime shows, and SVU is my favorite show. I always had a very forensic approach to figuring something out. I had a tenaciousness where I just wanted to figure things out. And I think pieces of the marketing aspect and especially the database aspect that actually came very handy very quickly right out of college because I was asked to manage Salesforce on a sort of coordinator level for our
Mm-hmm.
sales team. So I would say I am fortunate in that certain pieces of my major definitely did come in handy, but even now aspects of my marketing education has served me throughout my career.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting to hear because for me, I had something similar where I had these underlying skills in technology and databases. Just understanding how data works and understanding how to think around that can pretty much apply to any type of job you'd have that involves the internet or involves technology. It's just that it
Mm-hmm.
might not be the forefront of what you're doing. It's you need to be able to understand data in order to do these other things, but it may not be that that's all that you do. And so I think that's definitely how I've seen that shape up for a lot of jobs, at least until you get that specialization
Mm-hmm.
experience or you decide, hey, this is exactly what I'm going to be doing all day, every day. And the interesting thing about data is that I think it is for a lot of us, especially in the modern digital marketing world, data is a price to play skill to have.
Mm-hmm.
You need to either have the ability to understand code
Mm-hmm.
or the ability to understand data in order to really create good marketing in today's environment. And so it's good that you had those skills in that area of focus going into it.
Very, very valuable. And, it's funny, I don't consider myself by any means an implementation expert. I know we've talked about this, but what I consider a major strength is really being able to understand what a customer might want. How does that stack up against what the objectives of a client or an organization wants, and then translating that to the requirements for how we're going to measure. So maybe I'm not the best all-around generalist, but in terms of answering burning questions using data, which to me is sort of the point of an analyst role, depending on how technical or marketing side heavy you want to go, is really kind of the fundamental core of that role.
Yeah, I think that being a generalist can be good, but I think that eventually you get to be successful if you specialize in some area. So
I have to agree.
having that general skill can be useful, but then saying, here's my specialty and here's what I want to specialize in is really an important thing. And that's, I think that's a good maybe transition for us to start getting into that point where obviously you talked about search marketing and then getting interested in analytics, and they're like, this is really interesting to me. And now you've continued on that area, focusing on analytics, but then also specialize in that area. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did you decide, after getting into the analytics area, how did you sort of go on the path that you've gone on to the point where you are now?
So while I was at Scholastic, that's where I managed search marketing. And I got my first taste of analytics, but I didn't really have enough of background or training in it where I could say, I'm going to be an analytics person. I was still very search focused. So I went on to work for Avenue A Razorfish when it was one company at the time. And I managed paid search marketing only for Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, and Ralph Lauren. That's where I would say I really cut my teeth in terms of using Excel and working really fast to comb through mountains and mountains of data, presenting a lot. So that is probably where I got most of my background in presenting and understanding what the client really wants and reading them and things like that, because I presented every week, if not several times a week. The problem was I just felt it was too narrow of a focus. It was very operational. It was always trafficking new keywords, tracking them, trafficking new keywords, tracking them. And I was definitely interested in things like, how do people abandon forms? How do people progress through the website? Where are people coming from in general? And how does their behavior differ based on where they're coming from? So I felt just a little too limited in that role, but that definitely gave me the confidence that no matter where I was going to work next, I could handle it, because those were some of the most talented people I've ever worked with. So props to that.
Anybody who's in digital marketing has this moment and this realization that, hey, I love my current role. Search is, or whatever it ends up being. And I was pretty similar to you. It's like, I love paid search. It's amazing. But I can't see myself in 5 years still having the same passion for just managing a list of keywords and seeing how they're doing.
Right.
I need to expand my duties. I need to expand beyond just doing this piece. I have questions that people want me to answer, and I'm sort of either handcuffed or trapped in this area. I need to get after that answer. Right. And I think that's where a lot of people will transition into the analytics field. So when you did that, did you meet resistance? Did you try to do that on the same job and just say, hey, I'd like to take on more responsibility? Did people say, no, that's the analyst team? I think that happens a lot. How did that transition work for you? Did you have to go somewhere else? What did you do then?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. When I started to express, I'd like to take a look at some of the back-end analytics for this. What's your SEO strategy? This is where I started to cross lines. We're like, okay, so the SEO team is in Philly and they own their analytics. And I just felt a little bit one arm behind the back. So ultimately, and this wasn't the only reason why, but ultimately I did have to leave, and I found a new role in an e-commerce, online-only home furnishing startup. So this had some major advantages where now I was finally the owner of analytics, and I was learning Adobe inside and out, and we were doing amazing things with, site search is a very, very big passion of mine, looking and analyzing that, along with SEO, because that was really, again, that's kind of the side of search that I love more, because when I think of organic, I think of the people's organic behavior. It's not just that it's not paid, but I just think of it as a more natural way, if that makes sense. So, working finally in analytics, because it was a startup, you also run the downside that because online is your only channel, you're in a race every day, every minute of the day to keep that company afloat with your marketing. So I had to learn very quickly, and it was a sort of a mad rush to keep afloat. But I did learn that is also where I really learned how to leverage all aspects of an analytics tool to say, we know something's going wrong with our site search and the way our products are merchandised and whatnot. Let's try a couple of these things and see, what happens. And that ability to move quickly was exhilarating and scary, but exhilarating.
Yeah. So you needed to have, obviously, you go from not having that much control and that much, having an impact, but not necessarily knowing exactly the impact to all the impact and right. being on a small team and saying, hey, whatever I come up with, it has to be accountable to itself and it has to be pretty impactful. Yet I probably have to do it as well. So that's one of the problems. And, my evolution is the same, probably around the same exact time, actually. I was doing both search marketing, SEO, analytics, and writing the code of the website back when my business was very small, 5-person team. I sort of had to do all that. And then eventually we were able to get more specialized roles, or at least, hire people that could help with some of that work overflow. But the interesting thing that happened there is that we ended up making a choice that we wanted specialists around people who could just do the paid search element and right. that. But then that type of person also has the same conflicts that we're talking about here. And that is that they want sort of more opportunity. They want to be able to do more things. They want to branch out. And so it's sort of funny how that evolution goes. You start out as a specialist, but then realize that there's so many different things to cover that you want more ability and more control. But with that comes the other side, which is who's going to do it all and how do you do it all effectively? And so it's sort of that never-ending cycle of both optimization and opportunity that comes through.
And I think there are so many facets of this kind of work where you can specialize should you choose to do that. You can specialize in a channel where you're an email rock star, or a particular vertical like financial services, inside and out. But for me, where this year I felt it all really gel was learning to specialize in communicating insights. So I've looked across all channels. I have a great grasp of all of the fundamentals of excellent web analytics and all that. But for me, the specialization was how to communicate any insights that you're working on, regardless of the channel or the category that you're in, that aspect. So the same way someone like Simo Ahava, who I'm a huge fan of, he has the market cornered on helping understand how to use Google Tag Manager excellently, so I think there's all different ways to specialize. It's just finding what really speaks to you and how you're unique, what you bring uniquely to that.
Yeah. And that's a good point, is because as you go through this, there's so many different things we could do to specialize, and you might be good at 3 or 4 of those types of things. And Simo and I are friends as well. And when I first met him, like it's almost 2 years ago now, he's like, yeah, my website is about SEO. It's about web analytics. It's about Google Tag Manager. It's about, pictures that I take in my home in Finland, that type of stuff. And then as it didn't take very long for him to see the feedback and the writing on the wall that Google Tag Manager is what he can be the best in the world at. Like, that whole hedgehog concept, if you've read the Good to Great book, it's just like he can be the best in the world at Google Tag Manager, and he's sort of embracing that versus trying to be a generalist. And I think that's really a valuable lesson about him. And then also you can be the best in the world at talking about how do you get better at presenting your findings, how do you come up with a framework around that area, around the areas that you focus on. And that's sort of a, I don't want to steal your thunder, and I want you to explain sort of how you came at that, but it's sort of interesting to, that you bring up Simo because he did specialize. So
right. And, before I jump into my latest transformation, I follow Michael Hyatt a lot. And when he talked about the Strengths Finder, I hear it can be a little controversial, but just the basic concept of rather than having organizations or entrepreneurs focus on building out energy on building the skills that they're not naturally inclined for or passionate about so that they're more well-rounded. It's really isolating, identifying, and just kicking butt at what you are naturally inclined for and focusing on your strengths. That was really, I've struggled so much with where I fall short. Why am I not better at that? And instead of cultivating what I truly excel at, and that's what this year has been about. So, after my e-commerce stint for financial reasons, I was getting married, had a mortgage, all those things. I had to find something a little more stable, and I had a wonderful opportunity come along from Prudential to manage, to basically grow their campaign marketing from the ground up with their advertising agency. And I can't go into too much about that. They're very locked down in terms of sharing information, but it was an excellent way to start from scratch with exactly the way I wanted something done. The downside was that, once again, I was in a position where I was very siloed with the information I could work with. The analytics, site analytics, was locked up in a totally different department. There was some politics around the sharing of that. So I could only measure digital display and some paid search, but that wasn't really a big part of the program. So it was mostly display, but I did get a lot of experience measuring email, and that is another one of my favorite things to report out on. And 7 years, a marriage, and like a baby later, it carried me through. I learned so much. I spent time in 3 different divisions there, which helped expose me to so many different kinds of clients, so many different types of meeting participants. I can honestly count, to date, I've probably done close to 200 presentations or more in my career, and Prudential was a big part of that. But when I came back from maternity leave, I'm me, I'm sort of a crunchy granola spiritual yaya person. And, when I came back from maternity leave, it struck me that if I'm going to spend time away from my child and family, I want every minute to count, where I'm building something. I feel proud of something. I'm leaving a legacy, and I'm just walking away from that day feeling like I really did something. And it was starting to feel different. It was starting to not feel that way. It was just starting to feel like the same stuff day in and day out, which is fine. But it started to create friction with where I was. And at that time, I was given the opportunity to present at the 4C Client Summit. And normally they like client case studies, but I begged them to let me present about presenting data effectively, which was a total departure from anything anyone was talking about. But I was so passionate about it. So they let me do it, and I was terrified that I was going to have like pitchforks thrown at me. But it was such an amazing experience. And they later told me it was one of their top rated sessions of all time, which was so humbling. I mean, they've had some amazing, amazing speakers. But what that told me was that this is a message that's really important. It's the kind of message maybe people, it's bothering them in the back of their mind, or they know something is wrong or just not going well with these meetings and presentations, but there's a better way, but they don't have a tool set or a framework to actually make that happen. So at this point, I didn't even know what an online business was, but I just knew somehow that I had to keep on this path. And as I built up a little steam on the speaker circuit with this, because it kept being very well received, I was encouraged by a few colleagues of mine, like, hey, maybe you could actually do this. And then some people approached me for actual client work and coaching, which was the most incredible. The idea that I could actually share a part of my experience to help improve how someone else is navigating a part of their career was absolutely, there's just no word. There's no word for that feeling, to give back like that. So, it took a lot of planning and some luck, but this year was the year where the folks at Analytics Demystified graciously offered me a part-time role that allowed me to transition, where I would still keep my analyst edge sharp, doing my analyzing, helping to coach an analyst on the client site, which has been a really gratifying experience. I've learned so much, but also not kind of have to think about sneaking around to build a personal brand and feel guilty that there is something I'm working towards, even though I'm owned by this company, essentially.
Yep.
So it
Yep.
was a lot about freedom, and it's just been transformative for my whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, how long from when you started to get that idea to when you put it in place? How long was that process? Was it a couple months? Was it a couple years that you decided, hey, I need to do something else, but I'm not sure what it is yet? You get this speaking gig. What's the time frame that this all takes place?
I would say it was like a slow progression with a really steep curve at the end over the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It started with that sort of tension and friction where something isn't right when I came back from leave, but I did not have a clue what I could possibly do instead. I mean, with all the obligations I had at home, I wasn't no in position to be like, hey, I'm out of here. And, I still really loved the people that I worked with and I liked the work, but it wasn't speaking to something that I knew I was able to give. And I think when I
Yep.
started following a lot of health blogs, I noticed that people create online businesses and courses and books and things. And I was a big follower of your site at that time too, and how you offered these free tool sets, things that bonded me to you, and you didn't even know it. And and that creates happy customers eventually. You know, it's been a little scary only because sometimes I think when you create these products and give for free, they expect that you're sort of doing this for fun. And you are doing this from a giving perspective because you always want to give more than you get back. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, you do have to pay your bills. So I never quite understood this sort of misalignment where if you're an entrepreneur publishing content and helping people that way, it's like you're not allowed to try to make money in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Or market to people. It's okay if you're working in a corporation where you're making that, but that's what I'm trying to work around is show, listen, I give a lot for free because I want you to be successful. But eventually, when you're really ready to take this to another level, my son has an incredible appetite. I do need to do something that pays the bills eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's always a tough transition, and I think that it's good to hear your timeline and how you thought through it. And I was actually I was the same way. I mean, I realized that I was in a rut. I realized that something needed to change, but at my time, and I think I might have mentioned this on the podcast, but it's worth repeating. I was like, what can I do to make me more exciting? Me excited, not actually exciting too. I mean, both excited and exciting. And I was like, I want to do speeches. I want to do more speeches. And I was like, how can I get a speech? And people are like, well, you need to write something. People need to find you. And I was like, oh, I'll start my blog. And I had always wanted to, and I had always blogged for a long time, but I never really got serious about it. And so I started Jeffalytics just in order to like get speaking gigs.
Interesting.
And then I put stuff out there because I was like, well, if I want to pitch content marketing to clients, I need to do it myself. And so that was some of the content stuff that I did. And it was a lot more successful than I thought it would be based on some of the things that I put in there. And I was like, oh, this is enough that I can, maybe this is the outlet itself. Maybe it's not just the speaking stuff, but it's just to become this thing,
Yeah.
This personality. And it sort of you just take the feedback and you run with it and you start to do things. But I think that one of the transitions that we both are making as online business owners is the difference between positioning yourself as an authority in order to sell consulting services versus positioning yourself as an online business person. And they're totally different because you can give away the kitchen sink for free and then people will buy your implementation and for a lot of money. But if you give away the kitchen sink and then you ask somebody to pay for a little thing, it is different, and it is a different model. And I'm still navigating it, and that's why you and I are sort of like formed a support network even
We're
to talk
workout
about these
buddies.
things because yeah, exactly. So that's an interesting way to look at it and to see that. But I think that it's neither of us have any doubt probably that the right move was to do this. It's just navigating it and just continuing on that path.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm part of several business coaching groups, and everyone is going through the same struggles. But, last week I was in Atlanta delivering a training workshop, and I have never felt more sure that this was the path I meant for right now. It was so exhilarating. watching people's work transform in front of my eyes, engaging them, hearing them laugh because I said something, and I will say about speaking in general, it's no coincidence that I specialize in helping people speak, and I do that through speaking because I love it.
Hmm.
It terrifies me, but I absolutely love it. And I believe that you don't have to love it to make it work really well for you. But when you shift your mindset to show what incredible impact you can create through speaking in a small setting, in a large setting, but speaking effectively, it's been transformational for even some of the people in my audience that I've talked to. And there's
Yeah.
nothing more gratifying than that.
Yeah. So I'm curious about this whole saying you gave over 200 presentations over the years. Was it speeches like in front of an audience? Was it like in boardroom type presentations? Can you give me a little bit of background on some of these presentations you've done?
It's a big mix. So I would say are small boardroom meetings. Many have been calls with multiple people located across the world, and like larger format conference presentations. Those I'm still
Hmm.
ramping up on. But I mean, I consider even when you're presenting a new plan or an implementation plan, that's still a presentation. You're
Yep.
still hopefully going through the motions of asking, what is it people are looking to gain? What is the objective of this presentation? And what is the end goal that we're going to leave with to make sure that it made good on the promise it was supposed to make? So I see them all as presentations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting that you say that. I teach at the University of St. Thomas, and I've mentioned you to my last crop of
Oh,
students as this is somebody you should be following because she found a niche that is so needed yet so not everybody knows that they need it, and
right.
that is just knowing that when you have the floor, when you have the ability to talk to somebody about something, you have their undivided attention.
Hmm.
Probably, especially, starting
For
off,
about
you
eight
have,
seconds, yes.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And you also are, and this, I've said this to people in a presentation before, and it didn't go over very well. But since this is my podcast, hopefully people
Lay it
are
on me.
cool with it. You're in a position of power.
Yeah.
You have the ultimate power to sort of tell people what you want them to do because they do have your attention, and you can use that to do many good things. You can
Hmm.
inspire people to do more. You can give them information that they, in a very streamlined way, you can give them information that they maybe didn't have or something that's blowing their mind. You can do all these different things with that presentation, and that could be a keynote speech in front of 500 people.
Hmm.
I think I've done those. Or it could be in front of a 5-person group of people and just talking to them about what they need to do. It could be talking about your business plan for the next year. It could be any number one of these
Hmm.
things. But the most important piece is to realize that you got to use that to get your whatever your story is across. You
Exactly.
need to get it to inspire action because otherwise you're sort of wasting people's time. And so what I've been doing in my class is sort of teaching just sharing some things that I've learned about presenting. And it's funny because it has nothing to do. Presenting is not a discipline of
Hmm.
analytics, but it very well should be.
Yes.
The intersection between what you tell people and what you are seeing in analytics is very important. And so I take time out of maybe talking about tools, and I spend less time talking about the tools and more time talking about the story that you're trying to achieve, the value that you're bringing to the table. And it sounds like that's very similar to what you're doing as well.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you that the level of energy, the enthusiasm, and the focus that I bring to a presentation is no different for a small meeting or a large
Yeah.
a conference keynote. Obviously, things like volume and dramatism are going to change.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be like one day in a world far away in a small readout. But I've always brought that same quality to both because in the end, my goal for any time someone has graciously given me their time and attention, which is at a premium nowadays, I am going to make the most of that and deliver what it is they need. That is the
Yeah.
goal that I have. And you are absolutely in a place of power when you're presenting. It can get a little heady, drunk with the power, but but at the same time, the way that I think about that power is, for me, the sweet spot is articulating that struggle that they're having, phrasing it in a way where they know, yes, I got you. I understand. But I've knocked down the barriers and I'm going to give you the tool set on how to do that today. Like that feeling, that's the power that I'm drunk with. That the idea that I'm going to help them make a change starting the next day, that it's going to affect the rest of their career.
Absolutely. And I think that once you get to that point where you realize what that is, first is just realization that a presentation shouldn't be a burden by any means. It's like the biggest opportunity you have because you sort of control the way that things go and you get to bring your ideas across and get your audience to pay attention. The more you can do with that. And I agree with you when you say that it doesn't, you take the same approach, whether it's 5 people or 500 people, but there's some, and I'm sure there's some nuances between that, but I agree with that. And that, I a lot of times will sort of use my small classroom of 15 to 30 people and ask and sort of go through concepts and see if they're getting it. And then I can use that for bigger groups. And so it's sort of a test ground. And I think that nobody, when we think about presentations, a lot of people think that it's going to be that 500 person keynote.
Right.
But that's not always the case, right? That's actually usually not the case. That's the exception, not the rule. It's just like if you do a startup, it's going to be Facebook.
Right.
Take a lot of work to get to that point, and maybe you will be, but start small, right? If you're going to start, just start somewhere and just get comfortable with it and do a lot of that because eventually the nerves go away. Eventually that little dizziness that you get going up there might go away, but the value you bring to the table can last a long time if you get good at it.
Completely. And, part of the struggle that I've had in getting my message out into the universe a bit is, like you said, convincing people that they need this kind of help or that this is important, because a presentation, when you first hear it, is TED Talk, and there are so many shades in there that I am trying to help people understand. When you're having a 3-person meeting and you're speaking, you're presenting. These have all different levels, and you may not feel it's important because you don't like the idea of trying to brainstorm and create pretty slides or be more confident. But if you are struggling with fears you're getting through that process, with presenting data over and over and leaving with the feeling that your clients don't get you, they don't appreciate you, they don't understand you, how you're presenting is critical. And Jim Stern talked a lot about that on my podcast episode 5. It's essential if you want more.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people think that it's like I said earlier, it's a burden, but I think that really it's such an opportunity and it's such a great way to get things across. And so when you look at how do you find a market for it, it's getting past that first realization that this is an opportunity, and then it's building a reputation and building that back catalog like you're doing.
Right.
That really helps you get there. And as you grow your business, it's not always, and it's hard to quantify these things. Like, what's the value of a speaking gig? What's the value of you doing a workshop that you were doing last week? It could make your entire year in 2016. It could make your entire year in 2019. You just don't know. And so a lot of this is building up the repository of goodwill and the repository of that history and that story that really can go a long way. And so that's really what we all have to think about as anybody who's looking at starting their own business. There's no guarantees in this thing.
No.
But what you can do is you can be focused and you can build up your reputation as being this person. And then eventually people just think of you as the person that goes into that area.
And I also try to think what I uniquely bring to my work. I'm somewhat fortunate in that I'm a bit of a first mover speaking about this stuff, which is what prompted me to go forward. But there's a downside to that. If I said, learn how to create amazing advanced segments in Google Analytics, I think people would be beating down my door. But that's not my specialty. It's a new topic because no one has really spoken about it before. But what I also uniquely bring, I think, is my personality. I'm an open book, no holds barred. If you've listened to my podcast, I share all kinds of stuff on there because I want to show that I'm a human being. During the workshop last week, we were all kidding around and we were exchanging like funny home videos, and I showed that I was actually on the Newlywed Game with my husband a few years ago. So everyone insisted they watch it, and it could have been embarrassing, but it was such a funny, sweet moment for people to see that side of me. And, I got a really nice comment from Michael D. Healy who said, an expert who is also a human being is okay in my book.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that to be so flattering because I often do find that sometimes when you are a self-proclaimed expert, there's a sort of untouchableness and a lack of approachability to you. And
Mm-hmm.
I want my audience to feel that I am here for them. I am doing this for them. It's ultimately to support my son's incredible appetite, but really the real mission behind it is for helping them.
Yeah, that's good because you're right. There are a lot of experts. There's a lot of people out there speaking who, after the speech is done, they sort of crawl back into their little
with
world,
their
and you don't
entourage.
really hear from them, and you can't really have a conversation with them or anything. And
Exactly.
I think that there's a way to make it without being that person, and I think obviously you're going to make it without being that person, and as we work and support each other, that's going to be that's definitely how to go through this.
Exactly.
So curious though, you said thinking about this and in finding a market where you're not sure that a market existed before. How did you learn this? How did you learn this? And if there's nobody else to do it, was it a lot of trial and error? Was there any books or online resources you looked through to get to this point?
So you mean in terms of presenting data, the actual
Yeah,
practice?
yeah.
Yep. So this actually is a funny story. For my MBA, I stupidly volunteered to present like a capstone presentation day where students could get up and do that because I had so much free time to do that. But I did it anyway, and I wanted to do it about businesses using social media. And I was like, you know what? There's this cool new tool out there called Prezi, and it's built on like a social platform. I'm going to use that. And I remember logging in, and it's this sort of infinite canvas, and I'm like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? Like, I had no clue what to do because it wasn't vomiting thought after thought on PowerPoint and bullets, and they didn't even have bullets, I think, at that point. So I said I totally need to go back to the drawing board. So I picked up Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds, and my entire world just cracked open about talk about psychology. I mean, this was like the real deal about how the brain understands information. And he made a mention of another book called Brain Rules, which I think is the most important book people can read in general to be a good person, just their best self. Absolutely fascinating about how the brain understands information there. And Gar pulled a lot of those learnings into his practice. That was sort of a gateway. So then it was Resonate and Slidology by Nancy Duarte were incredible. And then I discovered how data visualization fits into that whole piece because Stephen Few was mentioned in Gar Reynolds' book. And I was like, oh my God, there's this whole thing about how data has to be presented. Like, no crazy grid lines and different rainbow colors, and I'm not animating every letter in on my slide. Like, but isn't that what you're supposed to do? Because no one teaches you that. No one teaches you this stuff when you go into business. I don't care if you're at analytics, marketing, whatever business. People don't empower you with this knowledge. So those were really my starting points. And I eventually read Information Dashboard Design by Stephen Few and Show Me the Numbers, which was incredible. I would say the latest book, if anyone is just starting out with this idea, Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer Knaflic is probably the best of each book that I've read rolled into one, focusing on the data side. But when she talks about storytelling, so we're always talking about storytelling. What really is that? I've never found a practical method to attack that after hearing someone talk about that. So she gives that practical way of thinking about how to actually pull a story out of data that's beyond making a chart look clean and pretty. So I would definitely recommend that one.
Interesting. I'll have to check that one out because I think I've heard of that title, but I didn't really know much about it. So your endorsement's really helpful there. It's funny that you mentioned Prezi as well because I never really got Prezi because I was like, this is just it's a prettier blank canvas, but I still needed to come up with something. And I was like, this didn't really solve my problems. It actually created more for me. But then I was actually just reading Presentation Zen, finally getting around to reading it. And it's interesting that book is, I think, definitely a good starting point for anybody who's looking to get into this. But if you sort of, you can get a lot of that information in blog
Mm-hmm.
posts and just by listening to you talk and stuff like that as well. And so I'm going to check out some of these other ones as well just to see, because I like what you're saying about summarizing the best parts of each of the books. That's why
Mm-hmm.
maybe the storytelling with data might be a good title to recommend to everybody.
And the other thing I would say is that even though I recommend these books every time I speak, what I have identified as my unique role in serving this audience is how I am distilling the information that's in those books and offering it from a lens of the digital analyst and marketer's unique struggles.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of those books are focused on the large TED Talk format, which isn't realistic for most of the presentations that we go through. So I have worked really
Mm-hmm.
hard, especially in my training workshops, to help translate and distill that down to a practical use case for those
Mm-hmm.
meetings while still not violating every way that our brain wants to learn information.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it because you're right. The TED Talk is sort of what a lot of people think
Mm-hmm.
about having, but
And one
how
day,
often are we in that? Yeah. Well, and I think I mean there's it's a great format and it's a everything about it. I can't say anything bad about the TED
mm-hmm.
Talk, but the reality is that not everything we're doing is a TED
Yeah,
Talk,
very little.
and so this yeah exactly. Especially when it comes to data
Yeah,
and presenting findings from marketing campaigns and stuff like that. We're a little bit different
right.
way we go about it. Great. So, was there any people that helped you along the way to get to this point, or was it more? I'm sure there's a lot of people that helped you and influenced you along the way.
Absolutely. And he's going to hate me because I mention him every time, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, Tim Wilson from Analytics Demystified was really instrumental in helping me understand that this was an idea that had legs. I was very doubtful of myself before, but right after my eMetrics Boston presentation, which got great reviews, he sat me down and he was like, you know, if you had had a website or blog or a podcast, everyone in that room would have signed up for it and followed you.
Yep.
He's like, you do have a blog, right?
Mm-hmm.
The irony was that I had started a hobby blog for health, so I knew all the ins and outs for doing that, and it was going to get me nowhere in terms of ever being actual income generating.
Yeah.
But it just never occurred to me that I had a specific topic that I excelled at that I could talk to and the skills to build an online destination to house that information. It never occurred to me that these would cross over. So that was a
Yeah.
lightning bolt moment that he really helped me achieve. And he's now the partner that I work under for Analytics Demystified. So I
Mm-hmm.
get to sort of revel in his amazing skill every day. And, he pushes me. He pushes me to grow. And I think it's really important to find a cheerleader who's also going to push you and not take any crap from you that you're doubting yourself or, you have barriers in front of you. So I owe him a lot for that.
That's great. And I think that you're right, though. I mean, having somebody who has been there, who has been successful in areas and has that comfort, they can really, they can help you gain that confidence, but also sort of tough love at the same time. And I think that can be important to say, hey, this a lot of it's good, but some things we need to work on, and some things that are not quite as good as we think. And so having that type of relationship makes a better product.
And
Absolutely.
it helps that he has the same philosophy about all of those things. He's a phenomenal presenter, and that really comes through. His skill really comes through when he presents. So that was a really great alignment for the philosophy of how to do the work and also how he blazed a trail with creating a very, very rabid following for his Excel mastery and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so, how much? So you said that you didn't spend any time on the website, or you had a website that wasn't really around presenting or anything like that.
Nothing to
How
do
much
with.
time do you? And so I always ask people how much time they spend on their personal brand, but it sounds like not much until it became everything, or a lot of your time now. I'm guessing going into that area.
Yeah, I mean, I was experimenting with Twitter for a few years. My first tweet was, "What the heck is this thing?" I didn't understand it. But over time, I noticed that if I shared things that people found relevant, they would follow me. And,
Mm-hmm.
eventually, I also noticed when I first did that 4C presentation that Twitter was how people talk about you. I got a lot of tweets during that presentation.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, this is just changing everything I understood about how to get exposure. So I create a lot of tweetable moments in my presentations. I have my handle nestled in an unobstructive place when I think a moment is tweetable. And Ethos 3 is a company that talks a lot about creating tweetable moments. So that's a good one to check out. But that was basically it. A few things on LinkedIn and mostly Twitter. But when I created my blog, I went in completely headfirst in learning from online entrepreneurs like Pat Flynn, John Lee Dumas, Chris Ducker, that whole crowd, to learn how to build a personal brand online by giving and giving to an audience and just being insanely valuable, as they would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you've done that. Your website's very clean and precise with what you're doing. It looks like you've been doing this for a long time, which is sort of, it's almost frustrating for me because I'm like, I'm a website guy, and my website, I don't even.
Oh, see, I think your website is so much cleaner and more effective towards like driving me towards an objective than mine. And I guess we're our own worst critic, but part of it is also, I've been working on websites for a really long time. So I try to think of it like, what would I want when I get here?
Yeah.
And I've even done what they call peak tests with usertesting.com. They're free. You can get them to basically find someone who will just review your site for 3 minutes, completely free. And I do that on occasion, especially if I make a big change. And it really helps me understand, like, oh, they're expecting to find this here. I better move that up. And my website's going to be undergoing a pretty major change soon because I still don't even feel like even my homepage brings you through my story and my services the way I want. Yeah. So it's a work in progress always.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Everything's a work in progress. And that's the thing is, like, I think we might all be disappointed in our own websites because we have an idea of what they should be, and then we have the reality. And that's a tough part. I like a lot of parts about my website, but there's a lot more that I want to do with it. And that's the challenge and the opportunity that comes with being an entrepreneur.
But being an analyst entrepreneur, we have a secret edge to help us understand how well our websites are doing, which is like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. So it's fun. I learn a lot about my website when I teach too, because I sort of use the analytics from my site as the example. And it's sort of funny to see the questions that I have and then the questions that other people get too. Like, what does that mean and everything? And so you start to think about things a little bit different way when you share it with other people. And that's probably a pretty big part of what you're talking about as well. Yeah. And that is having other people give their opinions and their thoughts in what you're doing can really make the product better.
Yeah, I'm always asking for feedback in my emails. I'm constantly saying, just hit reply and drop me a note. I read every single email. I respond to every single email. And I have gotten some tremendously valuable feedback from doing that I don't feel I have that platform with a lot of the people and experts that I follow. So
I think that we're in a different era now. I think we need to work harder to get noticed because there's just more saturation out there. But I think that we also have the technology and the tools to create even stronger relationships. And so I think that's something we always need to keep sight of too as we go through this. So we're getting close to the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you a few questions just about how you can pay it forward to other people looking to get into this world of marketing and analytics. So first one is, and this is a tough one sometimes to answer, but what's the best piece of advice that you ever received along the way?
The best piece of advice I received, and I didn't know it was advice at the time, was from my dad. And he said, there's nothing you can't do. Stop acting like other people are smarter or better, because I am constantly comparing myself to other people. I have what I call grass is greener gene, constantly comparing myself. But I used to be upset when he would say that because I would think, no, you don't know. I'm just not as smart and good as these other people. But that bit of advice has been echoing through my head this year, where I have found that when I really want something and I go after it in a smart, efficient, ethical way, it seems to manifest for me. So I'm knocking down believing that there are things I can't do. I'm
Yep.
not to say that I don't self-deprecate all the time. I do. It's fun. It shows that I'm a real person. I'm relatable. But I'm on a growth pattern, and the more I understand and help other people understand that there aren't things they can't do, the more my message becomes stronger. One of my presentation training messages is, I use Steve Jobs as an example of someone who looks like such a natural speaker. He made it look so natural. He just must have been so good at it. And good is a judgment. It's not really a definition or a scale. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, there's nothing natural about a natural speaker. He practiced for months. He did what he
Mm-hmm.
needed to do to master and internalize that content so intimately, it felt like an extension of him when he was up there. Nothing natural about it. And I believe that people that really want to improve their confidence in how they speak and present can knock down their own barriers with the right tools. It does not have to be an innate ability built in.
Yeah. And everybody should know that there's no natural speakers. There's not a single one
No,
in the
I
world.
have severe stage
Um,
fright, and I went
yeah.
through years of training of musical theater in high school. Nothing natural about it.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I don't get nervous at all anymore, but it's all repetition.
Yeah,
Took me, you had said 200 presentations over the years. I've probably done the same amount,
yeah,
hundreds of different times in front of people, and eventually it just goes away.
yeah. I still get very nervous. I'm so nervous about whether they're going to like what I have to say, whether I remember
Mm-hmm.
things, that for me the nerves have never gone away, but I channel it into an excitement and enthusiasm that I care about what you think and how this serves you so much that I'm just going to be so excited and
Yeah.
nervous.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned this whole grass is always greener thing because I think that I get that too. I think that's part of being an entrepreneur is that we're never
Right.
satisfied. The biggest thing you can do to be successful though is to constantly train yourself to look at the good that's happened and not dwell on the bad. Because what ends up happening, I'm speaking for a lot of people here and entrepreneurs, but you have 10 good things happen and then one bad thing
Mm-hmm.
happens and all you think about is a bad thing.
Oh,
And
yes.
then it's like the bad thing is not really even that bad. It's just not perfect
Right.
or it's not what you wanted. And you're like, man, I got to, do that. And so it's easy to either just say, I'm not going to do this anymore because of the one bad piece of feedback,
Right.
or even worse, spending all of your time trying to correct for that one
Yep.
person who's never going to be happy with you.
Yep.
It's the ability to say, screw this. I know I'm doing the right thing, and the majority of people think that I'm doing the right thing. That really helps you. That's the only way to go. Otherwise, you could easily let other people get the best of you. And so that's the biggest thing that I've learned is no matter how annoying or bad something
Mm-hmm.
seems, if you concentrate on the good, it will get you pretty far because there's usually a lot more good signs that you're doing the right thing than there are bad signs.
Absolutely. I really struggled after my first workshop because it was mostly great feedback. It was my first one, and you want it to be perfect, but for a first one, I think it wasn't bad. But there was one or two people that just hated me. They
Yeah.
hated what I had to say.
Yeah.
Said some mean things.
Yep.
And I got so trapped with just those pieces of feedback. And a friend of mine, really helped me pivot my perspective on that to say, your message isn't going to be for everyone. There's going to be people
Yeah.
that want to do things like you, or there's jealousy, which didn't even occur to me, but there could be jealousy,
Yep.
but there could be things where they're just not going to be the ones, they're not meant for your message. And,
Yep.
shortly after I had that conversation, the client came back and told me about the amazing progress her team has made as a result of the training. And I was like, okay, I'm back.
That's great. Yeah. Well, that's it's really important, and it's funny because like that's happened to me too. Like after you do a presentation and somebody comes up and go, "Oh, I pretty much could have taught that. I didn't learn
Right.
anything new."
Yeah.
And and so what I did is I just wrote like a blog post to myself,
Oh,
and
okay.
it was great. It was called "Congratulations, you're an effing expert." But I didn't censor myself, and I go, and then like the first paragraph's like, "Hey, you're pretty cool. You're a pretty awesome guy. How about you effing teach a class your effing self?" And then and so I wrote that to the guy. This is just not not I didn't actually write this to
Right.
them, but I felt pretty good about it. And I was just like, all right, there we go. That's my therapy. And then I focused on the ones who worked because
Right.
here's the deal, and this is a lesson I've learned. I teach at the university. I've taught probably 500 people in person
Wow.
analytics, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do. And of those 500, 450 of them think I'm the best teacher they
Right.
had. Like I get that level of feedback for them. I get, some of them just don't even fill out the form.
Right.
Of that last 50, maybe 20 of them genuinely hate my guts. Think they're better than me, think that they should have been teaching it, think that they don't like my personality, they don't like my self-deprecating jokes, any of that crap.
Right.
And to them, I say, I used to just get mad about it, and I had to make adjustments to the class, and then, then I'd find the other 20 who didn't like my adjustments, that type of
Right.
stuff. And I would try to cater to these outliers.
Yeah.
And the more that I do this, the more I get comfortable in saying, they just don't want what I got.
Right. They're not buying what I'm
they're
selling.
They're just not the right ones for me, and I'm sorry about it, and I'm sorry that that's not the right one for me.
Right.
But you got to go after the ones who want what you have.
Yep.
And the sooner you can do that, and Seth Godin just wrote about this a couple days ago, and the same thing. He's like, if you want to reach 90% of people, you can just keep on doing what you're doing. If you want to reach 95% of people, you can do what you're doing and then work a lot harder to get that extra 5% to turn. But for that last 5%, nothing you can do will ever get you there. And so stop dwelling on it.
That's amazing. Oh, I love Seth.
Seth Godin takes what we all use an hour to write into a or we all say in a podcast. He does it in like seven words.
Yeah.
And I'm like, screw you, Seth Godin. No, he's great. I love it. I know that I couldn't do that because that's how good he is. It's exactly. Like I don't get the how could I could have done that with a lot of these people because I realize how difficult it is. But you're right. Other people will say I could be Seth Godin. Yeah. I was like, yeah, he's been writing amazing stuff every day for the last 20 years. Right. Come back in 5 when you were doing everyday writing.
Right, exactly.
And we'll talk.
Yep.
Yeah. So awesome. I know we went into a little bit of a tangent there, but I think that we both have the same.
I enjoyed it.
So same point of view on that one. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you is, what advice do you have for a new marketer, somebody who's looking to get into this industry?
The best advice I would say is to really try to join communities where people are talking about what you're doing. In the beginning, I had a lot of trouble finding communities that would help me. I think I discovered a webinar one day and I was like, oh my God, people give this information out on a webinar and I learned something. And, have a never-ending thirst for learning. But find communities. So, with Slack, with like the analytics community has its own Slack channel. And I'm going to totally mess up the URL, but I believe it's bit.ly/add-measure-slack. And I think each of those are capitalized, but you can obviously check this afterwards. But there is a very thriving community of people talking on there, asking questions. Like I was having problems implementing a form with GTM, and I just put a note out there, and within an hour, I made a connection to someone who's very prominent in the industry. He helped me with that, but now we exchange ideas on things. And the one thing I did from the beginning was networked a lot. I love people. I love meeting people. It's amazing to meet someone that has meant the world to me. And, I want to give that experience vice versa. So never hesitate to reach out to an expert or someone that you follow and admire and just let them know how they've helped you. Don't expect an answer back, but just let them know how they've helped you. And you never know, you may make a connection that will be your next stepping stone to something.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that, just looking at some of the connections you've made within the Measure community, within the people who are in that area, and just seeing some familiar faces for me, I can see how that's been really valuable. I was sort of on the fringe of the Measure community, but I never really got to be too deeply into it, and it's sort of a regret of mine because I've for a long time been a dabbler in more than in analytics and search marketing and a lot of different things, and so I've sort of been on the edge of some of those circles where those things overlap. And I think that joining a certain community can be really helpful. And just look at how this has helped you out. The Digital Analytics Association has been it seems like a really good thing with you to work with them. Web Analytics Demystified, so some of the companies that are involved there, the community and all that. It's been, when you're looking to launch something, if you're looking to go on your own, now you have a group of people built in that can help you, that can help you with whatever you want, or even if it's just saying good luck, that sometimes is enough. that's really a cool thing that you can get with a strong community.
Exactly. And I mean, that's how we connected. I've been a fan of yours for years. And when I saw you launched a podcast, which I'm so passionate about, I looked through and I saw Chris Deseiden, who's a very good mutual friend of ours. And I said, why not reach out? I'm just going to have her tell him that I think he's great. And, the rest is history.
Yeah, it's really cool how that happened. And since then, we've sort of been talking, and we're at pretty similar phases in what we're doing here. And so not only are we podcast guests, but we're now sort of helping each other out through our online business journey. And that's really cool. And like you said, it's all from networking. Yep. It's all from mutual friends, mutual admiration.
Taking a chance.
And people are often a lot more accessible than you think.
Yeah.
Just from a podcast perspective, this is the last episode of our season 1, which I'm calling it. And just, it's all about approach. I mean, I had a list of 10 people that I wanted to be on the podcast for the first, part of it. And I just wrote down names, just, no particular order. And I was able to get all 10 of them to join the podcast, which is insane to think about that. But it all comes down to both approach and finding common ground and sort of just, and how you come about it. And so it can go a long way to be part of a community, to be around people, to sort of like, there's so many different tactics you can use in order to get people to give you their time. But, getting people to give you their time it's sometimes easier than you think. But also sometimes it's all about your approach.
And it's not emailing them and saying, hey, can I buy you a coffee sometime? It's like, what can I offer you that's valuable to you so we can help each other?
Yep, exactly. And so that's the important thing, is creating mutual value, and then also just being so respectful to people's time as well. Like, here's how much time we need, and here's how much time it's going to last. And I know I'm actually keeping you a little bit longer than we had bargained for.
Good.
So we'll have to wrap it up here. But it's sort of fun to talk about this, and this is sort of the conversations that you and I have had, and that's why we're starting a mastermind together in 2016 as well, is to sort of go through this and every couple of weeks just keep on talking about these topics and holding each other accountable.
Yep, I can't wait.
And now it's in writing on the podcast, so we got to hold ourselves to it.
There's the commitment.
Yep, exactly. So, all right, any other pieces of closing advice you might give, or anything else you wanted to share with us?
No, I mean, I just want to say, if people want to find out more about me and what I do, I'm at leapica.com, leapica.com. And I, too, have a podcast that's called the Present Beyond Measure Show. You can find it at leapica.com/podcast. And, I want people to never hesitate to reach out to me or the person that they feel has made a difference in their life, or express a struggle to me. I just want to know what it is people struggle with and how I can help them knock down those barriers.
Awesome. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes as well. And I really appreciate having you on the podcast. It's been great getting to know you over the last several months, and looking forward to continuing that on in 2016.
It was all my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Lea. Well, you can tell from that interview that Lea and I have a lot in common to talk about. We spent 30 minutes after the podcast just talking about our businesses and ideas for the future. And as you could hear on the podcast, we are also going to be holding each other accountable in 2016 as well. So if you're, just thinking about this concept of an accountability buddy or a mastermind, you should consider finding an accountability buddy or a mastermind if you're looking to grow your business and your career. So if you want me to match with somebody, please do let me know via email. You just email Jeff at Jeffalytics.com, or even commenting on this post. I encounter hundreds of marketers each year at various levels of experience, and so maybe I have a good fit for you. Now, as we close out, I want to read some reviews. And there's 2 reviews that came in since the last time I read them on the air, and I want to share them with you. So the first one is from Andy Forsberg. It's titled Digital Marketer. Seriously awesome lineup of guests interviewed by one of the most knowledgeable digital marketers I've encountered. Highly recommended. Thanks for that 5-star review, Andy. Really great to have you on board, and it's been great to watch you grow your business as well. And so the next one is from N. Scalise. Hopefully I'm saying that, pronouncing that properly. Very interesting with fantastic guests, 5 stars. I'm very impressed with Jeff's podcast. The first episode with Rand is very good. That's a great way to start a podcast series with a guest like Rand. Highly recommend that you check this out. That's awesome. Thanks for listening along. And yeah, the guests have been amazing. I can't even believe it. I'm going to do a retrospective episode, like I said, next week, and I'm going to talk about that. But basically, When I first started this thing, I pitched one person, and that was Rand. And I said, hey, if you can ever find time for me to interview you, I'm going to start a podcast, and I want you to be one of the first people on the show. And he's like, okay, sounds good. And, took a little bit of time to get him on the schedule. But then once he was agreed to do the podcast with me, it made it so I could tell people, hey, Rand Fishkin's on the podcast. Do you want to be on it? And a lot of people are like, yes, absolutely. If it's good enough for Rand, then it's good enough for me. And so there was a little bit of that aspect coming into it. And so once I had Rand recorded, I was able to approach other people. And the first 10 people that I approached, I got 10 yeses, which is unheard of in this game, in this world. And I'm surprised by it every day. I've recorded 9 of those. There's one person that's a definite yes, but it's hard to get on her schedule, so I'm working on that. And so it's been interesting. And then in addition to that, I've added a few more people to the roster as well that I've recorded with, and there's several other yeses along the way. I've only heard one firm no. I've only had one person who didn't email me back at all. And so of those, that's pretty good stats. And so that's interesting. Anyway, I digress once again, but that was it triggered that when this review came in about Rand. Yeah, that was a great way to start a podcast. I couldn't agree more with you and Scalise. And so, awesome. Let's make sure that if you leave your review and you want to get your 15 seconds of fame, you should do that. And if you want more fame, just write longer, because I could probably stretch out the review to 30 seconds. I could maybe even do it for a minute and give you that minute of fame. And so go to Jeffalytics.com/Lea for show notes. And I look forward to talking to you once we pick up with season 2. Thank you.